Good day and welcome to British Mirror. Picture this. The Brexit war is over, the dust has settled, and Britain is supposedly moving on. Then suddenly, out of the fog, a bill appears, quietly worded, carefully packaged, politically disinfected. But critics have given it a far more explosive nickname, Keir Starmer's so-called Brexit Betrayal Bill. And just when it looked like it might slide through on polite indifference, a bombshell report drops, torpedoing the whole thing and ripping the lid off what some are calling the Great Remainer lie. Buckle up, because this is not about ancient history. This is about who really won Brexit, who is still fighting it, and whether the argument ever truly ended at all. Quick favor before we go any further. If you are enjoying this sharp, straight-talking breakdown of British politics, hit that subscribe button and click the notifications bell icon. Most viewers have not subscribed yet. It is free, takes a second, and it helps British Mirror keep shining a light on Westminster. Thank you if you did. Now back to the show. Let us rewind slightly. Brexit, love it or loathe it, was supposed to be settled. The referendum happened. Parliament argued. Britain left the European Union. Elections came and went. Governments rose and fell. And yet, for many voters, there has always been a lingering suspicion that the argument never really ended, that it simply changed shape. Less shouting in the streets, more paperwork in Whitehall. Less megaphone, more memorandum. Enter Keir Starmer, former director of public prosecutions, careful speaker, lawyerly precision, a man who rarely swings without checking the legal footing first. His critics have long accused him of being a Remainer in pragmatic clothing, someone who publicly accepts Brexit while quietly seeking to soften, smooth, or sidestep its consequences. Supporters say that is unfair. They argue he is simply trying to make Brexit work better. Less ideology, more competence. And this is where the bill comes in. Framed by Labour as a technical, sensible measure to improve post-Brexit arrangements, critics on the right wasted no time slapping a far more dramatic label on it. The Brexit Betrayal Bill. The accusation was simple. This was not about efficiency. This was about creeping realignment with the European Union by stealth. Regulatory drift. Legal alignment. Sovereignty slowly leaking away not with a bang, but with a briefing note. At first, the debate simmered. Then came the report. A dense, detailed document that did what politics often fails to do. It followed the evidence, and what it exposed, according to opponents of the bill, was devastating. The report challenged one of the central claims made by pro-European voices since Brexit, the idea that divergence from European Union rules has left Britain isolated, weakened, and desperate to crawl back under Brussels' regulatory umbrella. Instead, it painted a far more complicated picture. One where Britain had not collapsed into chaos. One where regulatory freedom had not triggered economic Armageddon. One where many of the supposed benefits of realignment were, at best, exaggerated, and at worst, mythical. This matters because the emotional fuel behind Starmer's approach rests on a narrative. Brexit was a mistake, not necessarily one to reverse outright, but one to quietly correct, smooth the edges, undo the rough bits, make it look, feel, and operate suspiciously like membership without calling it membership. The report essentially said, not so fast. According to its findings, many areas of divergence had not produced the horror stories repeatedly promised. In some cases, flexibility had helped. In others, the differences were marginal. And in several high-profile sectors, Britain had already chosen to align where it made sense, without needing sweeping legislative overhaul. In other words, the idea that Britain must legally shackle itself back to European frameworks in order to function was exposed as, at the very least, misleading. And that is where the phrase Great Remainer lie starts to bite. Now, let us be clear. Not every Remainer believes the same thing, but there has been a consistent argument pushed in media, academia, and politics. Britain cannot cope alone. Britain must follow European rules of trade. Britain must align to survive. The report punched holes in that story, not emotionally, but empirically. Cue political panic. Suddenly, the bill that was meant to glide through a sensible housekeeping started to look like a Trojan horse. And nobody likes discovering a Trojan horse after it has already been rolled into the courtyard. Opposition to the bill hardened. Conservative MPs, reform figures, and Brexit campaign veterans lined up to declare that this was not competence. It was capitulation, a slow-motion undoing of the referendum result through technicalities most voters would never read. Think of it like this. You vote to leave a club. You hand back your membership card. Then a few years later, the management says, you are not a member, but you still need to follow the dress code, pay the fees, and ask permission to use the facilities. At some point, people start asking what leaving actually meant. As the report circulated, the bill began to wobble. Amendments piled up. Support drained away. What had been framed as pragmatic governance began to look politically radioactive. Labour found itself defending a measure that sounded increasingly out of step with public mood, particularly in areas that voted strongly for Brexit and have not forgotten it. Keir Starmer, meanwhile, faced a familiar problem. His instinct is always caution. But caution can look like calculation. And calculation, in British politics, is often interpreted as dishonesty. Supporters insisted he was being misrepresented, that this was not about rejoining the European Union by the back door, that sovereignty remained intact, that Britain would still set its own rules. But the report made one thing painfully clear. Many of the supposed justifications for the bill were built on shaky ground. And once voters suspect a premise is false, everything built on it starts to crumble. This is where the story takes on a wider significance. Because this is not just about one bill. It is about trust. Brexit was a once-in-a-generation decision. It cut across class, region, and party loyalty. Millions of voters who rarely felt heard believed, perhaps naively, that this time their voice had mattered. Ever since, there has been a quiet fear that elites never truly accepted the outcome, that they nodded politely, then got to work finding ways around it. The bill, fair or not, slotted neatly into that fear. The bombshell report did more than derail legislation. It validated suspicion. And suspicion is a powerful political accelerant. Suddenly, figures like Nigel Farage were back in the spotlight, arguing that this proved what they had been saying all along, that Brexit was under constant threat, that vigilance was required, that the fight was not over, merely paused. For Labour, this was deeply inconvenient. Starmer has worked hard to detoxify his party in the eyes of Brexit-supporting voters, to present Labour as a safe pair of hands, patriotic, pragmatic, respectful of the referendum result. The bill threatened to undo that work in a single stroke. If you campaign on the idea that you can turn things around fast, you do not get to turn around 6 months later and say, actually, this will take ages. Please be patient. That is not how political promises work. What makes the situation even more precarious for Starmer is that May elections are rapidly approaching. Local elections in England, plus elections to the devolved parliaments in Scotland and Wales, are scheduled for May. These are going to be absolutely crucial as a barometer of public opinion. And all the indications are that Labour is heading for a drubbing. Polling suggests they are going to lose significant numbers of council seats. They are likely to face losses in Scotland and Wales as well. These elections are going to be portrayed as a referendum on Starmer's leadership, and if they go as badly as predicted, the pressure on him will become immense. This is where things get genuinely fascinating from a political drama perspective. Speculation is already rife in Westminster about whether Starmer could face a leadership challenge if May elections are catastrophic. We are talking about a prime minister who won a massive landslide less than a year ago, potentially facing a coup from his own party. That would be extraordinary. But it is not impossible. Labour has a long history of internal strife and leadership challenges. If backbench MPs start panicking about losing their own seats at the next general election because Starmer is so unpopular, they might decide they need a new leader to save themselves. Political self-preservation is a powerful motivator. Starmer clearly knows he is in trouble. This week he told cabinet colleagues to focus on tackling the cost of living and deliver for the whole country. That is crisis management language. When you have to tell your own cabinet to focus on delivery, it means you know people think you are not delivering. It is like a football manager giving a halftime team talk when you are 3-0 down. Everyone knows things are going badly, and now you are desperately trying to turn it around before the situation becomes irretrievable. The cost of living issue is particularly important because it affects everyone. Food prices, energy bills, housing costs, these are the things that determine whether people feel better or worse off under government. And right now, a lot of people do not feel better off. They feel squeezed, stressed, and disappointed that the change they voted for has not materialized in their daily lives. Labour's challenge is that many of these issues are global or structural, not easily fixed by government policy. But voters do not care about excuses. They care about results. And if they are not seeing results, they will punish the government at the ballot box, which is exactly what these petitions represent in advance. What is particularly striking about this wave of petition activity is that it represents genuine grassroots discontent. These are not party political stunts organized by opposition parties. These are ordinary voters, many of whom probably voted Labour in July, expressing profound dissatisfaction. That makes it much harder for Starmer to dismiss. He cannot just say, oh, that is a Tory stirring up trouble, when it is his own voters signing these petitions. It is a genuine revolt from below, driven by disappointed expectations and frustrated hopes for change. The comparison to Liz Truss is unavoidable here, even though the circumstances are completely different. Truss became historically unpopular incredibly quickly due to specific catastrophic policy decisions, mainly a disastrous mini-budget that crashed the economy. Starmer's unpopularity has different roots, more about cumulative disappointment and perceived broken promises rather than one spectacular failure. But the speed of the decline is similar. Both went from election victory or taking office to being deeply unpopular in a matter of months. That is genuinely remarkable and suggests something deeper is going on with British politics, possibly a broader crisis of trust in political institutions and leaders generally. There is also something darkly amusing about the parliamentary petition system in this context. The government created this system to give people a democratic outlet, a way to raise issues and force parliamentary attention. And now it is being used as a weapon against the government itself, forcing Parliament to debate whether to effectively sack the current administration. It is democracy eating itself in the most British way possible, through properly formatted online petitions that meet all the bureaucratic requirements. Even revolution in Britain requires filling out the correct forms. The fact that this is a third petition calling for an election since July is also significant. It suggests this is not just a momentary spike of anger, but sustained, ongoing discontent. People keep starting new petitions because they want to keep the pressure on, keep the issue in the news, keep reminding everyone that this government lacks public confidence. It is a form of constant, nagging accountability that governments find very difficult to escape from. Starmer's response strategy so far has been to largely ignore the petitions and focus on governance. That might be politically wise in some respects. You do not want to dignify every criticism with response, but it also risks looking arrogant or out of touch. When hundreds of thousands of people are demanding your removal, completely ignoring them can make you seem dismissive of legitimate concerns. It is a delicate balance between appearing strong and appearing deaf to public opinion. The international context also matters here. We are seeing populist uprisings and political instability across Western democracies. Governments everywhere are struggling with low approval ratings, insurgent opposition movements, and voters who feel alienated from traditional political systems. Britain is not unique in this regard. What is unique is how quickly it has happened to Starmer. Most leaders get at least a year or two of honeymoon period before things go south. Starmer barely got 6 months before the wheels started coming off spectacularly.